the second mega matchup of the weekend. Georgia going to Ole Miss in what for Ole Miss is an elimination game for the playoff and the SEC championship. For Georgia, yes, they have the one loss. A 10-2 Georgia, I think, still gets in to the college football playoff, but I don't think a two-loss Georgia with those two losses, if they did lose to Ole Miss, would get into the SEC championship. David, the Ole Miss we saw last week, all right, compared to the Georgia we saw last week, I think the confidence levels offensively are going to be a little bit different because Carson Beck is becoming a problem for Georgia right now, something we never thought we'd say. And while the defense is really good, it's not as elite as the ones we've seen in the past. If you're an Ole Miss fan, how much better should you feel about your team and this year's matchup against Georgia going into this week as opposed to any big game in the past? And I'm going to make a Penn State comparison in a second, David, but go ahead.
I mean, given the fact that Ole Miss is 7-2, struggled for a few weeks, hadn't put up more than 30 points in 4 consecutive weeks. This is the best possible scenario for you to host Georgia. I mean, think about it for a few reasons. One, the offensive performance that you're coming off of. Not that just, we put up record-setting, numbers against Arkansas, that alone is going to help you win the football game, but it's a confidence standpoint, right? When you've had to hear week after week after week, man, what happened to the Ole Miss offense? They've just gone in the closet and they're hiding away. To have a performance like that the week before you play what could possibly be one of the best defenses in the country, to the psychology that's going on in the locker room right now, I think is healthy, and I think it benefits Ole Miss. And then second of all, think about this. You catch Georgia coming off of a rivalry game against Florida, and a week before that they're going to have to go and play, hold on one second,
Tennessee,
a week before right? They're going to host Tennessee. So imagine that. You get them after Florida, but before Tennessee. I think that's a great chance to catch them. And then guess what? You also get them at home, which I think is the third biggest factor for Ole Miss here. And yeah, I mean, if you tell me right now that Georgia, it was easy for Georgia to get up for the Texas game. Number 1 team in the country. You're playing them at Austin, and no one's giving you a chance to beat Texas except for us, of course, right, with Mr. Jeff Foxworthy. But no one was giving them a chance to win the game. It was easy for the Georgia football players and for Kirby to motivate them to get up for Texas. My question is, with LSU, with their backs against the wall, like you said, can't afford another loss or you're out of the college football playoff. Georgia, with one loss, did they get up for Ole Miss the same way that it was easy to get up for Texas? Because if the answer is yes, I think Georgia wins the football game. If the answer is no, and you play with your food for a little while on the road and you let this Ole Miss offense cook the way they did it a week ago, well, guess what? You're going to be 7-2 when you host Tennessee.
And I totally get that methodology. Where I'm at on it, and there's a couple things in this game, and we'll get to schematically, what they have to do, and it's pretty obvious for Georgia offensively what Carson Beck has to stop doing. But, if this was in the past where Georgia was so much more superior than Ole Miss was at the line of scrimmage, including Ole Miss's defense to Georgia's offense. A lot of people are going to be talking about Georgia's defense going up against Ole Miss's offense, and I get it. It's Kirby Smart versus Lane Kiffin. But I think this game is going to be flipped and one on the other side. Ole Miss brought in these defensive players and built this team to negate the huge advantage that Georgia has had in the past on the line of scrimmage. Because at any point, Georgia, even if they weren't playing prolific and playing really well, could kind of go back to their bread and butter and find a way to get past Ole Miss. We saw that to a certain extent last year. But to me, I think this Ole Miss defense, you can make the case, is as good as Georgia's defense overall, or as close as they've ever been. Yeah. And if we're sitting here, which we are in this point in time, saying this Georgia offense is struggling with turnovers, you look at the number that Carson Beck's having, and it's not just tip balls or blown assignments in pass pro that ends up getting the quarterback hit or the receiver falls down. He's making very questionable decisions, including throwing the ball over the middle of the field. It's almost like he's struggling with what Jackson Dart struggled with in the past in seeing those intermediate defenders. But if we're going to sit here and say this game is going to come down to which offense can move the ball at a higher rate and it's even on defense, I like Ole Miss here, Cone. And I know last week James Franklin fooled me. Him and Andy Kotelnicki fooled me. I thought Penn State was finally ready to get over that hump, finally ready to win that big game to put themselves on top of the perch, right, over Ohio State and in the Big Ten. Ole Miss is in somewhat of a similar spot. Now, they haven't been knocking at the door, as long as Penn State has. But through all the bad, losing to Kentucky at home, right? Losing to LSU after leading the whole game, really until the end, and then losing in overtime. You have an opportunity in Oxford with a team that can do it to finally exorcise these demons. If I was Lane Kiffin, I'd dress up like the Exorcist before this game. I'd get a shaman. I'd get from every religion ever to go in that locker room and exorcise the demons. But I think this Ole Miss team is as prepared as ever. But is that mental, that devil on your shoulder, right? The guy saying, hey, you can't do it. You're still Ole Miss. You're not Georgia. You'll never beat Georgia. You can't win this game because you're not supposed to win this game. Can you get over that hump? Because if Lane can, and this team can, with Jackson Dart and all this experience that they have, I think this could catapult this Ole Miss team into being dangerous to win the college football playoff. I really actually believe that. I don't think they're going to make the SEC championship, even if they win this game, but they would get into the playoff. Look who they got left, David. That game at Florida, I know that Billy Napier came out and said Lagway may not miss the rest of the season, but if he's not able to run like he normally runs, that really takes away the best arrow in his quiver. Not that he's a bad thrower, but that makes that game a lot more winnable. And then you're going to play a Mississippi State team that's just not ready yet. So this is a play-in game to me for Ole Miss. So all the marbles are on the table for them. For Georgia, if you lose it, you're still alive. Not that you're not going to play as hard or whatever, but you still have a chance. And for that reason right now, at least right now, I am leaning toward Ole Miss winning this game, David. I know they're an underdog. I think it's 2.5.
Yes,
right? It's funny. Both home teams, Ole Miss and LSU, are underdogs in this game. But when you look schematically, if you're Mike Bobo right now, Cone, and Carson Beck, who is a somewhat experienced guy, but has been struggling lately, how much do you trust to be able to have him drop back and throw the ball 30 times? Because this Ole Miss front seven will get after your ass, just like the Georgia front seven will.
Well, when you talk about that little devil on the shoulder, that's me. I'm going to be that little guy on the shoulder this week because the Penn State beating the Buckeyes analogy is so apropos. Until I see it, until I see Lane Kiffin lead this Ole Miss team to a win over the Georgias of the world and even over the Alabamas of the world, who they won't get this season. But until I see it, then I really can't believe it. But like I said, the circumstances are set up better for them than they could ever be. Even better than if Ole Miss were coming in here undefeated. I know that there would be a great confidence boost in that. But to me, with no margin for error with the two losses, I think you're set up better. Now, to the Georgia side of things, to answer the question you just asked, yeah, I mean, the biggest problem Georgia, the biggest negative for Georgia right now is Carson Beck turning the football over at this rate. It's the worst I've ever seen him play. The best positive for Georgia right now is Carson Beck is turning the football over at a clip we've never seen, and yet you're still 7-1. Now, like we said yesterday on the recap, Georgia's defense is really, really good. I don't think they're good enough to win the national championship or maybe even the SEC championship if Carson Beck continues to play this way. Fortunately for the Bulldogs, he still has the capability to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He still has the capability to live up to that preseason Heisman favorite height, right? So as far as Mike Bobo goes and the tactics of it, you got to get the run game going, obviously, to build the play action off that. I think if you can go play action off that and even roll him out, maybe take half of the field out of the equation, like that's going to make things a little simpler for him. Obviously, when he throws a post or when he bangs a dig route, it's as good as it gets in the country. There's something going on mentally with his inability to read through these coverages right now. And I think maybe going at pace is the biggest thing to help. When we saw the second half of that Alabama game, when you said, hey, this game is lost, there's no hope whatsoever unless you just throw every read out the window and go as fast as you possibly can. What happened in the second half of that Alabama game? That's when they really started to cook. Maybe we need to come into a game with that mentality. Yes. I know it's counterintuitive. Sometimes you think, well, wait, a quarterback that's struggling, don't you want to slow the game down more than even going fast? I'm not saying go warp speed out of our mind, but some tempo here and there, some up pace, I think could help him a little bit.
No, and David, I was just going to say that. And if you're Kirby Smart, you're a defensive guy, you cannot fall in that trap. You cannot fall in that trap of trying to protect Carson Beck because everybody is, what a better Trojan horse move than everybody talking about Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss offense and the creativity. And you know that he's got some stuff dialed up and he's been waiting to do this. Why not, if you're Georgia, go in there and go up tempo? early, right when you get the ball. Hell, if I win the coin toss, I may take the ball and start going fast. It takes a lot of thinking out of it for Carson Beck. You can maybe catch that Ole Miss defense on their heels, and maybe that's one way to open up the run game. Because I know Pete Golding all week is looking at those defensive guys and saying, if we shut down the run, we shut down their dreams. If we stop the run, we stop our inability to be able to win a big game. If we can do that and put it on Carson Beck, he is going to fold. But if you go fast and you throw that punch early and you get that defense back on their heels, you're going to be the aggressor. And maybe that's what starts igniting it. Then all of a sudden the defense is feeding off of it. Like, holy hell, the offense came to play, boys. Mikael Williams and all the studs that Georgia still has running around. But on the other side, if you're Ole Miss and you're Lane Kiffin, Blaine, I'm looking right now telling the guys on offense, hey, we are going to go out and we are not going to play this thing close to the vest. You cannot Andy Kotelnicki this game like he did at Penn State and play scared and not get creative, because if you call the game scared, the players are going to know it and they're going to play scared or play not to screw up, and that's a death sentence. And if you're Ole Miss and you get up early, right, let's say you get up 10-0 like Penn State did. Now all of a sudden does Georgia panic on offense, and now it's, well, Carson Beck's got to throw it 35 times, which means he's going to put it in harm's way. That crowd starts feeding into it, and then you find it snowballing for you.
Well, it feels like Georgia's been panicking on offense almost the entire year. And if Carson Beck throws 3 interceptions, you can go and walk yourself out of this game because you're going to get buried by Ole Miss. Remember what Ole Miss did to Arkansas last week? Dropped 63 points. And, Jake, you talked about it all the time. Where's the fun been in this Ole Miss offense? Well, damn it, they looked like they had fun last week in that game. And you walk into this game right now, and if you're a Georgia fan, really, what are you feeling good about? Etienne's banged up in the backfield. You don't have a lot of creators on the outside. Your defense is your defense, not as good as we're used to seeing. But right now, Ole Miss this last week, and that pass rush for Ole Miss is for real, guys. It is. Yeah, it's just going to come down to, and what's been the weakness to Ole Miss this entire year, it's up front. Can Ole Miss withstand up front? I think Lane Kiffin will do a great job play calling standpoint to kind of neutralize that. But this is a really interesting game. I think it might come down to the premier names, and that's at quarterback and Jackson Dart and Carson Beck.
And I know Paris Jr., the running back's hurt, which is tough for Ole Miss. We'll see how good Harris is on the outside. He's been beat up. Didn't see him last week. They didn't need him. Believe me, no. Jordan Watkins and Caden Lee.
And they needed that other star.
But what's funny is you're like, well, guys, and I know people, and I'm going to get to the chat in 1 second, but people are going to be like, well, the last time people doubted Georgia, they went on the road, and dominated Texas 30-15. They did. I agree with that. But the offense still didn't play great in that game for Georgia. And I don't know with Jackson Dart and some of these weapons, and I know Quinn Ewers is a good player. I think Jackson's got a little bit more dog in him, and he can run. The quarterback run game for Ole Miss, it doesn't have to be prolific. It doesn't have to be elite. It just has to be there to extend drives. This is a fascinating matchup, and it's going to be overtly physical. I do want to go ahead and get to the chat, though.
Let's go to Ammo Cat 1. He says, Georgia is going to destroy Ole Miss and Tennessee. I think they're just a better football team. I don't even know if I'm going to watch these games. It's not even going to be close.
Yeah, I disagree with that 100%. I just think you're a Georgia fan that's hyped up, and that's okay. That's okay.
Let's go to Mr. Bucknuts. He says, I got Ole Miss, and for one reason and one reason only, I think that pass rush is going to be better on Saturday.
Well, and again, we talked about this with Arkansas going against Ole Miss. We talked about this multiple times. If you're Ole Miss, I don't think you have to rob Peter to pay Paul up front in this game to stop the run or the pass. I don't think you got to bring a tidal wave of blitzers. I don't think you have to run stunt, whether you're running slants, tons, Texas, whatever, and get guys out of position. Not saying you don't, but I think you show it and bring it sometimes. I think you show it and don't bring it. And I think you can play a lot of base in this game. If I'm Ole Miss early, I'm showing pressure and getting back to base because I just want to know early, can I beat you straight up or at least stalemate you straight up? Because if I can do that, then it's just a matter of time before Lane and them over with the Etch-a-Sketch and drawing in the dirt can figure out something against the defense. That's the question, and that's the difference, I think, in this Ole Miss team as opposed to the teams in the past. They had to trick Georgia. They had to trick them, whether it was on offense or defense. I don't think Ole Miss has to trick Georgia this year.
All right, let's go to
Oh, I was
Drinko.
going to say
Go ahead,
one
Ed.
thing. Sorry to interrupt you, Blaine. I was thinking of this. I think it also is very beneficial for Lane Kiffin to have gotten a look at what this Georgia defense did to stifle Steve Sarkisian in Texas when they were in Austin. It's kind of like it's kind of like you're playing a scramble and you got a 12-footer and you need to make it to win that tournament. Your boy gives you a look. He goes first. You get a look at that putt and then you get to make one. I think Lane Kiffin's going to go take everything and say, hey, this is what Georgia did on defense when they really needed it, when they really had to go on the road and beat the number one team in the country. These are some things that we can look for, and maybe that can help them get out to a little bit better head start than they otherwise would have.
And also, I'm going to go back to the first game of the year because I think Jackson Dart is a better player than Cade Klubnik, but I think the way they are built and the way they play are somewhat similar. So I wonder if you look at Georgia's defense, the way they played against Clemson and Cade Klubnik. I know the skill guys on the outside weren't what they're going to see this week or what they saw against Texas, but maybe that modus operandi for Georgia's defense is a little bit closer to what you may see against Jackson Dart, because as good as Quinn Ewers is, he wasn't a guy you had to worry about scrambling, right? So how many times did you have a spy on Cade Klubnik in big downs because he could run? Those are the things you can kind of garner from it.
All right, let's go to Drico. Says Carson Beck will throw them out of this game, but Ole Miss offense kind of held back with all the injuries. So in my opinion, I think it's going to be a little bit of a low-scoring game than what other people think.
I actually agree with that. What's the over-under in this game? Can we look that up?
54.5.
God, I like the under in that one. I know we got kind of fooled by a couple of the games this past week on the over-unders, but I didn't see Ole Miss dropping a 63-piece with Cajun fries and a honey biscuit against Arkansas. And then what South Carolina did to A&M is assault in half the United States.
All right, let's go to asset activities. He says the matchup to watch will be Dart versus this Georgia line. The scramble ability will come into play in this football game.
Yeah, and Cone, I'm going to talk about Shopify for a second, then we're going to get to rapid fire here and then get back to the chat. Remember, no calls today. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you, everybody, for hopping in here. But with a quarterback like Jackson Dart, you know this moment is huge. This is a career-defining moment for him. You don't want to take away his stinger by telling him not to create, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, take your chance. Be aggressive. I want you to be as aggressive as you were last week against Arkansas. But there is a fine line to watch between being aggressive and being stupid. And you could get away with things against that Arkansas defense that I don't think you're going to be able to get away with against this Georgia defense. Where is that line, do you think, for Jackson Dart? Or do you tell him just go let it all hang out? We'll sort out the bodies after the war.
No, he's going to let it all hang out. I mean, Lane Kiffin recruits a certain type of quarterback for a reason, that Matt Corral type quarterback, that Jackson Dart type guy who's an old school gunslinger who wants to take risks. What I find more interesting is at what point does Lane Kiffin decide when to put it in Jackson Dart's hands and when not to? What I mean by that is, let's say you're down 7 and it's early in the second quarter and it's 1st and 10 and you're trying to get a drive started, and usually you would call a halfback counter because you really like that in practice. Are you going to call that run game, or are you going to put the football in Jackson Dart's hands early to let him just say, hey, we're going to win or lose by what our quarterback does? Not necessarily abandoning the run, but in other scenarios where you would run the football, because that's really what Lane Kiffin's offenses are built on. Do you call those runs, or do you call drop back pass for Jackson Dart even earlier in the game?
Well, I think you can look. Yeah, well, I think you can look at the other side too, and how much does Kirby Smart trust Carson Beck at this point?
That's what we were saying at the beginning.
We were talking
That's
about
what we were talking about.
You have 11 interceptions. I mean, it's to the point. And you remember Kirby Smart with Stetson Bennett. Like, he kept Stetson in a box, and Stetson thrived. I wonder if he tries to put Carson in that box for this football game. Let's go to UTP. What's up, man? Says Carson Rett going to have a multiple interception game, yet Georgia wins. I think that Georgia's defense will make a couple plays.
Well, they're going to make a couple plays. I mean, I don't think the question is who's going to make a couple plays. It's, how long can you contain Jackson Dart and what this Ole Miss offense wants to do? Because, again, just like every other coach in the world, Lane has some stuff that he's been saving for this game. When the schedule came out and Ole Miss saw this, Lane's smart enough and he's been around the block to know, hey, there's some things I'm going to run earlier in the year to set up in this game. Depending on how it is and depending on how close it is. And honestly, I think depending on how Carson Beck looks, I think is going to depend on how much risk Lane Kiffin takes early in this game.
And Blaine, that was one of the things we were saying when your connection was still coming back on. Like, it's just not good enough for Ole Miss on defense to say, you know what, Carson Beck's been turning the football over. Let's figure out a way to turn him over, and we're good.
Yeah.
No, he's been doing that. They're 7-1. Look at the way they beat Texas on the road, and Carson Beck didn't play well. Ole Miss's offense is going to have to put up points if they want to win.
No, all right, let's go to Mac. Mac, what's up, brother? You want to get Shopify real quick, Jake? I apologize.
No, go ahead.
All right, let's go to Mac. Lane is great on script, and once it gets clunky like the LSU game, his teams never respond well. Kirby's going to eat him up late in this football game.
See, I think this year that's been the anomaly. I agree with you this year, but in the past, I promise you, I know all these coaches, that's not the truth. That's been one of the most surprising things about this. There's a reason why you look in the past and Lane Kiffin's teams, even when they've started out slow, have ended up scoring 50 points. Or he's in the third quarter throwing the clipboard up. This year it has been the anomaly. I mean, we talked about it with Mincy. It seems like the first drive, Ole Miss has been the best team in the history of college football. And then they just go Drew Barrymore from 51st States and forget the rest of the game. That was not the case against Arkansas, right? They kept evolving. Will that happen this game against Georgia, which is an entirely different defense from a personnel depth and talent standpoint? You're right. This year, that's been one of the most surprising things. But in the past, that hasn't been the case.
Hello there, viewer. Thanks for your time. Please hit that subscribe button. We'd really, really appreciate it. You guys are the best.